Do you want me to hit us with the line?
Yes.
Okay. What have you got for us today, Ligeia?
Diving pigs and pirates.
Diving
Yes, pigs
pigs
can dive.
and pirate, like in the same like context, like the same scenario, or separate from each other.
No, the pigs are a result of the pirates.
Oh. Oh, okay. Well, color me a little more intrigued. The diving pigs are because of the diving pirates. Okay. Um,
Right.
take us away. I'm all ears. I got my coffee. I'm happy.
Okay, we'll also talk about the first British settlers in North America, but that is more like a side quest. That's for the end of this.
Get that up for
Um,
bonus XP. Yeah, I like it. That's a side quest. That's what our shorts are. They're side quests. Oh my god, I love it.
yes, but we will start in the Mediterranean.
Hmm,
Um, so I will send you a picture.
exciting.
This is Yanko Zench. This is one of the pirates I was talking about.
Okay.
A Croatian pirate. Quite unusual because you would think, oh, pirates, they must come from England or from Spain, maybe, or from France, and not from
Oh,
somewhere in the
you
Mediterranean.
weren't going to mention Somali pirates, like Africa, but okay, that's fine.
Oh, that's not, but that's not the right time. So the
Yeah,
time we're talking about, that's the 16th century, and there were no Somali pirates at that time. Um, he did
there were
not
Asian
start.
pirates though, right? In the 16th
Oh,
century.
yes,
Hmm.
yes, around Singapore, for
Yeah,
example. So
yeah,
in that area,
no.
that was an area with a lot of trade. So there were rich ships, and it was good for pirates.
Hmm.
It's not good for pirates if you can really just rob little fishing boats.
Yeah, that'd be a waste of time and effort completely.
Right. I'll write the name down for you. And Yanko is basically their form of John.
Oh, okay.
And it's a very common name. Like John used to be a very common name in English speaking countries. And Zench is probably not his actual surname because their surnames usually end on ich. So we have a Janko Shajatovic, for example.
Hmm.
So that is the proper ending for a proper name. And the word Zench could be a mispronunciation of his home port, which is called Senj. But when you're in Austrian administration and you don't know how to pronounce things, then you read this and you probably think it's pronounced Zench.
Oh.
Um, it could be a form of Vincenzo because the Italians are close by too,
Hmm.
so could be a nickname that is connected to Vincenzo, or could be a form of a Slavic first name like Zdenko, which is also a Croatian first name. Um, And this probably went like on Ellis Island when the immigrants came and they had long, complicated names. And, the American administration would look at the passports and would just say, I have no idea how to pronounce this. Are you okay with being Mr. Smith from now on?
Yeah, they still do that.
Yes, and I mean, to be fair, Slavic names can be very long and can be rather complicated. And, you know, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you have 15 syllables and 3 vowels in the name. So I understand that maybe the Austrians didn't want to deal with this. There are names like Pshenichnikov in Russian, for example, and even the Russians think that it's too long and complicated.
Don't tell them about Welsh then.
Oh, I know. They in Wales they have this one village that has a 3-meter sign in front of it, right?
It's
Because the name
famous,
is
yeah.
so long.
I wouldn't know how to pronounce it. It's insane. But there's like videos on it, and it's just like that's unbelievable. But it just
Oh
reminds you,
yes,
language is beautiful.
that is true. So I've seen the name. I can't pronounce it, but I know that it is a name that means the chapel by the 3 trees or something. So they are describing the place with
Mm,
this name, and that's why it's so long. And
very
yes,
common English thing. I'm sure it's common in a couple of other countries to describe a place, and that's how you name it. I mean, it's the same with like older style names. I mean, the reason why Smith was so popular is because it usually comes based on a trade. Like blacksmith or cobbler, things like that. Mm.
Oh, but it's also normal for Germanic people, especially West Germanic people. So a lot of West Germanic surnames are professional surnames.
Mm.
That's not everywhere the case. For example, in Slavic countries, you have very often names that are based on first names, like Ivanov. Yeah, interesting story. But let's come back to Yanko. He was born in the upper Sava region, and the Sava is a river that goes through basically what is former Yugoslavia. I have to say, Croatia is an extremely beautiful country. It has a very long coast that is sometimes called the Norway of Southern Europe. Because it's also rocky and well, you have some nice beaches there, but you also have the cliffs. And because it's so beautiful and nobody has ever seen it in the Anglosphere, they
Mm.
actually started filming Game of Thrones there. So
Oh,
that is a place where they.
I think I want to say Essos. I don't think that's the correct name of it because I think Essos is the entire.
King's Landing.
Oh, King's Landing. Oh, I was thinking it might have been one of the more Mediterranean style ones, like one of the slave cities. But yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yes, and I mean it's cheaper than other places, so they started filming in Croatia.
Wow.
So as you can see, well, the Sava River is not directly close to the coast. It's in the inland,
Hmm.
but it has well, it's a river and it has side rivers, side arms. So he was born in that region, and he was on water very early on. No problem learning how to sail. So, as far as we know, the family was well off. We would probably say middle class nowadays. So he got somewhat of an education. He was not completely illiterate, and they were educated enough that he learned about the New World, which had just become a thing in 1492. He was born in, let me see, 1523. So we have about 31 years here in between his birth and Columbus finding the New World. When he grew up, he heard stories about this, so he was very interested in it. And he was lucky that when he was 3 years old, the place he lived in came under the rule of the Holy Roman Empire. And just to get this out of the way, the Holy Roman Empire is fully called the Holy Roman Empire of German nations, and it is also called the First German Empire. Um, because it was founded by a German king who entered a treaty with the Pope. And the dynasties that ruled it were always German dynasties, including the Austrian dynasty that ruled it. The Habsburgs, we will talk about them. Um, so they are essentially a German tribe. Um, and I will use the name Austria for them. I will use the name Italy for the guys who sit in Venice, just so we don't get confused. But yes, this is a giant empire that covers most of the European continent at that time, and they just acquired Croatia when Yanko was 3 years old in 1526. So he had the opportunity when he grew up to go to Trieste, and Trieste is now a port that belongs to Italy. It's close to Venice, actually. So let me see. I think I have a map for that too. So this map, it's a bit small, but you can see Trieste, and it's
Just touching Slovenia there up top. I see.
right. But as you can see, it's not entirely in Slovenia, and
Hmm.
Austria is a bit further away. And nowadays, you would think, okay, Austria and Switzerland are landlocked countries; they don't have a coast, so it's kind of weird to think about Austria having a navy.
Yeah.
At that time, they had one, and Switzerland still has a navy technically.
Hmm.
um, there are Swiss Navy mints out there, and I bought them, and it's not a joke.
Swiss Navy mints. Hmm.
So Switzerland never really had a port, but they count their customs office boats on Lake Constance as their navy. So they have 2 boats on Lake Constance, and that is the Swiss Navy, and they have their own brand of Swiss Navy mints.
Wow. Just for those 2 boats. That's
Fresh
great.
breath is important.
Yeah. For when the 2 boats have to talk to each other 100%.
I think just signal each other. And it's a big lake, so should there ever be a conflict with any of the other countries surrounding the lake, they will probably have to talk to. Okay, so as you can see, Trieste is a port close to Venice. It used to be the main Austrian
Right.
ports, and of course that means that Austria, in that case, got into conflict with Venice because that was Venice's job since the 8th century, which means they had been trading in the Mediterranean and mostly the Eastern Mediterranean for about 800 years at that point. And when the Austrians started to build their navy, the Venetians didn't like that. So you have 2 parties here that don't like each other, and they will occasionally team up to fight against the Turks. The Turks came from the southeast, and you see that in this map, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yeah.
That is, well, now it's a country, and it's the Muslim part of former Yugoslavia. And that is a big part of why there was a war, because essentially there were just some former countries and former tribes crammed together in an artificial country, and they didn't like each other. So the Turks had tried to conquer the Balkan area very early on. They started out in the 13th century, and they conquered Constantinople in 1453. So that was the fall of the East Roman Empire. And after that, there was nothing holding them back. So they started conquering parts of Southeast Europe. And they made it to Bosnia. They conquered large parts of it. And people from Bosnia had to flee, and they escaped to Croatia. We'll come back to them later. First of all, Yanko went to Trieste, and he became a sailor on a ship of the Imperial Navy. And the funny thing is, I said it's a very big empire. This empire also covered Spain. And in Spain, they had the same family ruling that was also ruling in Austria, and those are the Habsburgs. So I'll show you the Habsburgs, and I'm sure you have heard all kinds of weird things about them already. This is Charles V. He is the emperor of this giant empire, and he has the Habsburg jaw in the left picture.
God, yeah, it's quite something, huh?
He looks quite deformed. He became emperor in 1530. He was born in Belgium, but went to Spain, and he was king of Spain, and then he became emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And in the right picture, he doesn't quite look that deformed, so he looks a little bit more normal. And I used to talk about this with someone who had studied history of art. And she said, well, the Habsburg jaw is not really a condition. Some people had it in that family. And it's usually assumed that they had it because of inbreeding, but that's not true. It's a modification. So back in the times when they tried to marry other rich families and tried to expand through marriage, because this is what the Habsburgs did, they were sending pictures around, and the Habsburg jaw, this ugly feature, became a thing that was kind of like a passport for them. So if the person in the picture had that jaw, that was a real Habsburg person. But they didn't necessarily have this in real life, so the painters only added it to make clear that this is a Habsburg prince.
So you're saying that a lot of the Habsburg people didn't actually have that jaw, that chin.
Right. So there were people who had it. There were people who were mentally ill, who had very low intelligence. And yes, some of it could have come from inbreeding, but in general, the Habsburgs are people who did not expand so much through war, but through marriage.
Hmm.
And their motto is let others wage war, but you, lucky Austria, may marry. I'm not going to repeat that in Latin. But it's the Latin motto. So this whole family started in a little place with a little castle that is now part of Switzerland. And it was essentially just a nobleman who had a bunch of beautiful daughters. And he started marrying them off to more rich and more powerful noblemen. And that is how he started his empire, how he became big.
Hmm. It's a thing that they used to do back in those days, you know? I'm totally, yeah,
So they didn't actually have to conquer any places.
smart. Just marry your kids off and make alliances that way. Yeah, clever.
Right. So, yes, this is Charles V, and his brother Ferdinand I follows him on the throne, and that is one who resides in Austria again. So, Charles V resided in Spain, and his brother later on, who followed him, resided in Austria. So, they don't always have a residence in Germany, and they don't always have a residence close to their original castle or, well, even in Austria. And there are two lines nowadays, the Austrian line and the Spanish line. But through this, Austria and Spain were connected as part of the same empire and even ruled by the same family, literally ruled by brothers at some point. So, to get to the New World, which had been his plan from an early age on, Yanko went to Spain, to Cadiz. And Cadiz is also known as the gateway to the New World, because this is where the ships left from that went to the Caribbean islands and that went to South and Central America. So the whole conquest of the Americas started there. And he became a sailor on a ship that went to the New World that was known as New Spain at that time. And New Spain is a very broad term because it includes basically the whole Caribbean and parts of South America, like Venezuela and Peru.
Hmm.
It includes, I think, all of Central America, so from Panama to Mexico, everything.
Wow.
And even parts of North America. And at one point, it was so big that they had territories in Canada.
I could believe that.
Yes. And they did a lot of exploring. So, yes, we have to mention that they killed people, that they
Of
killed a lot
course.
of people.
Of course. You can't bring up Spanish without, you know, remembering the conquistadors and just
Right.
how the Spanish could be with conquering anywhere, really.
Yes, but Cortez, for example, only had 1,500 men, and he took down an empire of millions of.
Yeah.
So we will get into this in a different video because some of that was an accident and was not actually planned and was not due to the Spanish being these super soldiers.
Ooh. Juicy tease for another episode. Nice.
Okay. So, yes, New Spain is very vague. Columbus himself had first reached the Bahamas. So, we believe nowadays that the island he reached first in the New World was part of the Bahamas.
Hmm.
But there is some discussion about that. Let's just say it's the Bahamas. And this was also a place where Yanko appeared after a while. So, he served as a regular sailor and as a soldier on the Spanish ships, which means that he spoke multiple languages. So he probably grew up speaking Croatian, and then he had to learn, well, something like German maybe to enter the Austrian Navy. Could have been Latin, but they would usually have used German at that time. And then he had to learn Spanish to sail on Spanish ships. So it is unusual for Croatians of that time to get to the New World, but there were ways to do this if you wanted to. Problem was they didn't make him captain.
Hmm.
So this is something that also happened in the British Navy, for example. They had a bias against people who were not English. And you have this with Captain Ross's second captain, Francis Crozier, who was from Northern Ireland. And he was not ethnically Irish. He was of Norman descent, so he came over with William the Conqueror, or his
Uh-huh.
family came over. He was not that old. Um, and they basically moved through England to Scotland, and at some point decided to move from Scotland to Northern Ireland. So they were really not ethnically Celtic in any way. But because he was born in Northern Ireland, he was not made captain. So he was not recognized for his work. And it took him a while to get this title because they would skip him over and over again because they saw him as the Irishman. And they had very negative views of Irish people back in the times.
Mm.
Even the Duke of Wellington had to fight this. So also someone of Norman descent who lived in Ireland. And some English people made fun of him for this. So they called him Irish, and he didn't like that. So he said, being born in a stable doesn't make you a horse.
Wow. That's quite a good message. I like that.
Right. But, well, Yanko had the same problem here. He was Croatian, he was not Spanish. Even if he had been Austrian or something like that, they would probably not have promoted him because they simply didn't want the guy with a weird accent to become captain.
Yeah, it's just discrimination at its finest, but very common back then. Absolutely.
Right. So he didn't get his own command, he didn't get his own ship, and he felt he deserved it. So at some point, he returned to Croatia. And this was around the year 1553. And we know a lot of these dates because of the Doges. And I don't mean this Doge.
Don't tell me you're gonna put up exactly what I think you're gonna put up. Of course. Of course you're gonna put that up.
It's not. This is not it.
Way to keep it relevant to the kids, Ligeia.
So, yes, we're talking about this one.
Mm.
His name is Andrea Gritti, and that is a Doge of Venice. And this office of the Doge of Venice is an office that used to be the office of a governor of the Eastern Roman Empire. So when Byzantium, Constantinople, now Istanbul, when that was still Eastern Rome, they sent a governor to Venice because it was a very important trade point. And this governor founded the Republic of Venice later on, but not him. He's just one of them. This happened in the 7th or 8th century. And this governor became a very powerful person, so a very powerful ruler in the area. And we know Yanko's birth here because it was the first year of Andrea Gritti's reign, which is 1523. And we know that Yanko returned sometime later, 30 years to be exact, to Croatia in the last year of Francesco Danna's reign, who was also a Doge. And it's lucky that we know this because people usually didn't record birthdays or something like this. And I've seen that in modern China. So when I was in China, a lot of people gave their birth date as the 1st of January.
Really? Oh.
Yes, it's sometimes not recorded, and you can still find places in the world where people don't record this or don't remember or don't think it's important. And even in Christian countries, back in the times, the day of your patron saint, who you got your name from, your first name from, was more important than your birthday because your parents could pick your patron saint. They could not pick your birthday.
Fascinating. I mean, I would imagine, that there are definitely even people these days that still don't record a date of birth. But yeah, that would make me think of maybe like those maybe less populated areas, for example, or far more agricultural and stuff like that, way more out there that don't really do much when it comes to governmental things, or maybe even going to hospitals and stuff like that. People lesser off, but
Mm.
yeah, to think to hear about that is even in like China, that's quite interesting because a lot of them You think they would, but I suppose it could still go pretty rural, can't it? So, interesting.
Yes, I was in central China, and my friend's grandfather didn't know which day and which month he was born, so they celebrated on the 1st of January for him.
Oh. To think there must be so many people who celebrate January the 1st as their birthday, even those who aren't
Yes.
actually born on that day. That's a weird fact right there.
You can make it a holiday at this point. Just don't go to work because everyone in your neighborhood is celebrating their birthday.
Yeah, just everybody have a birthday on January the 1st. Let's just make it a thing. Then we all have it at the same time. We all have a good time, and then the rest of the year is just miserable.
So, Yanko was born in the first year of Andrea Gritti's reign, that is this guy, and he came home in the last year of Francesco Danar's reign, that is this guy. And in between them, there was another doge, so 3 doges during that time.
Mm.
Um, and we will have to talk about the Uskoks now, because there is a reason why Yanko has this beautiful red uniform. That is not a Spanish sailor's uniform. And they also didn't have these long rifles. So we'll go to the Uskoks now. These people are Uskoks, and you can tell that they have these southern Slavic clothes that you associate with the Balkan area and sometimes with Greece too. So especially the man looks very southern Slavic, and that is what Yugoslavian means. Yugoslavians are southern Slavs. That's literally what it means.
Oh, that's good for us Western people to know.
Yes, Yug means south. So the Uskoks are actually not a tribe.
Okay.
That's reenactment and movies.
Ah,
You
I
can see
think I've
some of.
seen these kind of outfits before. Yeah.
So you remember that the Turks were coming from the southeast and they were conquering places in the Balkan area and in
Mm.
what is now former Yugoslavia. It's not Yugoslavia anymore, especially in what is now Bosnia. So people from Bosnia did not want to convert to Islam, and it was an extremely violent wave of Turks coming in. That meant that the men would be killed if they didn't want to convert. Worse things would happen to the women, and women and children would be taken as slaves and would be sold into the Middle East. And this is why many people from what is now Bosnia fled to Croatia. And these people were called Uskoks, which means refugees, according to Slavic scholars. I cannot translate this, but that's what I read about them. That was the first wave of them. So people who had been expelled from their original homelands by the Muslim invasion back then, who, well, they didn't exactly like Muslims after that. Let me put it like this.
I think it's understandable in that situation. Yeah.
Right. So they came over, they came to the mountains. And Sini, this city that we've seen in the maps, I mean, you can scroll back or show the map again. That is the city that is written in red letters, called Sini, and that is one possible origin of the name Zench.
Oh,
That became their headquarters.
of the Uskoks.
And they were joined by 2 other fractions. For once, Venice had galleys. So the galleys that you've seen in the film Ben-Hur are not real. These are Roman galleys, and they have slaves in these galleys, and this is not reality because Roman galleys did not use slaves for the most part. But this was a very common thing in Venice. So when they had criminals, they did not put them somewhere in a prison. They used them as slaves on galleys. You can't just sit around. You have to work for
Yeah.
the Venetian Republic.
I mean, sadly, it's just a thing they did with slaves of any kind of nation. You put them to work, didn't you? It's free labor. It's a horrible truth.
Right. And Venice had some Slavic slaves, and the words Slavic and slave are connected. Also, an interesting topic for another video. um, so there were lots of people who had been galley slaves for the Venetian Republic who had originally come from the eastern shores of the Adriatic Sea, and who were Slavic, of different Slavic tribes at that point. And these people would return, and they would have beef with Venice. So they didn't like how they were treated, and some of them thought they were treated too harshly, or some of them claimed to be innocent. So yeah, it's not nice being a galley slave. And if they survived that and returned home, they would have fights to pick with Venice.
I might have to
So
put that on
they
a shirt. It's not nice to be a galley slave.
merch people.
Ligeia 2024. It's not nice to be a galley slave. I'll do it. I'll do it.
Okay, wait. Let me give you some ships just for the merch because
Do you want to put some ships on the merch?
okay, this is a 1520s galley, so that is about the time, well, 3 years before Yanko was born.
Oh.
And the Doge of Venice had his own galley, his own personal golden galley
Ooh.
that was called the Bucintoro. And there are replicas of this, and they're still being used.
Wow.
So it was a really big ship, and very beautiful. It was not made for war; it was made for representation.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a showpiece. Shows off your power and prowess. I get it. Looks good, to be fair.
And they have these processions with the ships in Venice. So that is an interesting thing that is a reminder of the power of the Doge. They're still doing it. So far with the galleys, which means they entered the Uskoks, the Uskok's lair in Zench, and they wanted to become part of the family. And there was a third party which was considerably smaller. So the Uskoks themselves and the Venetian galley slaves, they made up about 80% of the later Uskoks.
Wow.
And then you had about 20% of people who had some problem with the Turks or with the Venetians or problems in general, who simply wanted to fight. And I see them like the mercenaries that go to countries like Syria or Ukraine or Palestine nowadays. You have people who just want to fight, and their country is not at war currently, so they need to go and let out this energy somewhere. So they joined the Uskoks too. And our friend Yanko Zench was one of these 20% of these people who had some kind of problem with someone and just wanted to change their life, wanted to do something else, and wanted to apply what they had learned somewhere else. And he was not a very violent type, so he had been a sea soldier, but he didn't enter the Uskoks because he wanted to fight. He entered the Uskoks because he was a sailor, and they were sailors, but they had very small ships back then. I'll show you. This is one of them, and it's almost like a Viking boat.
Oh.
Very, very tiny. And the Uskoks would attack the Venetians with their little boats.
Hmm.
And they were partially financed by the Holy Roman Empire, which is Austria at this point. So Austria would give them money, they would give them equipment. They did not officially own them. So the Uskoks were officially guerrilla fighters. But of course, Austria had an interest in hurting Venice because they were rivals in trade. So they helped out the Uskoks.
Right.
And the Uskoks came around in 1532 when the situation escalated in Bosnia. And over time, their ships became bigger. So they started to look more like the Spanish galleons that Columbus sailed with. So this is not a Spanish ship. This is actually a Croatian ship of that time. It's a replica of one of these ships. And you see that it already looks a bit like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Mm.
So you could imagine this sailing around the Bahamas. And Yanko got his wish when he entered the Uskoks. He became a captain for them. And because he had been to the Bahamas, he knew something about the Bahamas that is quite tragic. The thing is, you had people living in the Bahamas that were called Lucayans, and Lucayans are indigenous people, so the Spanish would call them Indios. And there were about 30 to 40,000 people in the Bahamas when Columbus landed. And he immediately started to displace them, and he wanted to use them as farm slaves in Hispaniola. So Hispaniola is an island that is now covered by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It has 2 countries on it. But this was Columbus's headquarters. So he planned to set up farms there. He planned to produce food for all the explorers in the area. And it was also the place where he had his office. So he brought these people over from the Bahamas, and he probably knew that they were peaceful because this was the first place he had landed. And between 1492 and 1520, they basically brought over all of the Lucayans from the Bahamas to Hispaniola, and they worked them to death. So, yeah, you want to say something?
Nope, no, just responding.
Yes, so they probably didn't plan to work them to death, but it happened because these people were hunters and gatherers. So they did some fishing. They didn't have farming, and hunters and gatherers are often very lean people, and they're not used to doing continuous hard work.
Mm.
So that means that they get tired really fast. And that means you cannot use them for farming, because farming requires you to stand around in the sun for 16 hours and like cut hay or something like that. So that is one of the reasons why black slaves from Africa were brought in to the Caribbean, because you couldn't really use the local Indios because they were too weak and they died when you tried to keep them as farm slaves.
Right.
So this is the origin of the transatlantic slave trade. They simply worked the Indios to death and then said, okay, we need some people who are a bit more sturdy and who can take it. And in Southern Europe, specifically Spain and Portugal, they would then start buying black slaves. And the English started out with Irish slaves.
That's right.
Later, yeah, later on they would also trade black people, but they first started in the early 1600s with Irish slaves.
Yeah.
Yes, Yanko has a big ship now, and he knows that the Bahamas are empty. You have to remember that this is around 1555. This is about the year when they leave. And between 1520 and 1629, the Bahamas were essentially empty. They belonged to Spain and they were sold to England later in 1629. But for over 100 years, there was nobody in the Bahamas.
Wow. That's crazy. Especially when you think about the Bahamas, like nowadays. Just I mean, it's not 100% a tourist destination, but for the most part, it is. But it's got a lot of like local populations living there, working there, and stuff. So that's crazy to think for 100 years, not even all that long ago, it was empty. That's crazy.
Yes, and the Spanish somehow were not interested. I guess they had enough islands, so they didn't
They had enough
really.
of New Spain. They're like, we'll give up an island or two. It's fine.
Right. So I'll show you Sini now, because the Uskoks had enough of this place too. So it's very beautiful, I have to say.
Yeah.
Croatia just is one of these beautiful places. It almost looks like the Caribbean already.
Honestly, it's gorgeous.
But the Uskoks were disappointed because Venice had entered a treaty with the Turks. So, as I told you, occasionally Venice would team up with the Holy Roman Empire and they would fight the Turks simply to protect Christian Europe. But as soon as the Pope turned his back, they were back at each other's throats again. I I tripped over my tongue. Sorry.
It's all right.
um, all right. So Venice would return to fighting the Holy Roman Empire at that point, and at one point they would actually make peace with the Turks, and this was something that the Uskoks could not take. The majority of the Uskoks would then start attacking Venice even more, because they were now the enemy. They were colluding with the Turks, so they were really not happy with Venice and were attacking it everywhere they could with their small ships. And one thing about these small ships is they could enter bays that the Venetian ships could not enter because they were too big.
Clever.
So yeah, they could get away with it. And the Venetians developed a motto back then. I'll read that to you. It says, "May God preserve us from the hands of these Senti." And by Senti, they meant the Uskoks, so the people living in this place.
Right.
Um, Short referral to Venice here. These are pictures from the 16th century.
It's still quite impressive.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And the Uskoks felt that they were just a toy to the superpowers of that time. So the superpowers would have been the Habsburgs and Venice. And the Uskoks didn't like that Venice would just make peace with the Turks, and they didn't like that the empire, the Habsburgs, didn't really react to that. So the Habsburgs would later pay for that they hadn't reacted in time, because the Turks conquered more and more and more land in Southeast Europe and eventually came to Vienna. So they had them fight. They had to fight them off in their own backyard, and this is where we start with our short with the coffee and strudel and the croissant.
Oh.
So that's the reason why the Turks made it to Vienna. The Habsburg monarchy didn't stop them in time, and the Uskoks, they fought Venice, but some of them also left. So one group that is very well known that left went to what is now Slovenia. They went up north, and Slovenia is now south of Austria. So you've seen that on the map, I think. But they also left with 5 ships for the Bahamas.
Oh.
Because they had Yanko with them, and he was able to navigate. He had learned that. And he could navigate out there in the open seas. And there is a slight difference between the Mediterranean and the open sea. So the Mediterranean almost has no tides. The tides are about 1 meter or 3 feet high at most. And in the Atlantic Ocean, that looks a bit different. And you need some serious skills to make it in the Atlantic Ocean. He was able to do that, and they left with 5 big ships. So the plan was to establish a colony in the Bahamas, because he knew they were empty.
Smart.
And he was just hoping that the Spanish wouldn't catch him, because this fraction of the Uskoks thought the situation in Europe isn't getting any better. And the Habsburg monarchy just doesn't understand how dangerous the Turks are and that we need to fight them. So they will probably let the Turks take our land, and we don't want to be refugees again. We don't want to move into Austria or, well, even further north. So before that happens, we will just leave, and we will not go to Slovenia, but we will go to the Bahamas and start our own kingdom, essentially. It's not clear whether they had women with them at that point. So it's possible that it was just 5 ships full of men who would look at the situation in the Bahamas and see what they could do, whether they could set up some farms or something like that, whether it was possible to build a colony, and that they planned on coming back and taking the women.
Right. Kind of establishing a foothold first, and then.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's unclear where they landed. The main island would be New Providence. And that is also where the famous English pirate Blackbeard had his headquarters. There is some architecture left in the Bahamas. So, for example, Fort Montague. That is officially Blackbeard's tower.
Uh-huh.
But that was about 100 years after the Croatians had arrived there. So it was a perfect pirate nest because it had some of the same features that these Adriatic islands also had, where the Croatians came from. The Bahamas have very, very shallow water around the islands. So it's difficult for large ships to maneuver. And if you wanted to go after someone with a large Spanish ship or a large English ship, that quickly became too difficult. So the pirates had ships that were smaller and lighter, so they could get away and they could enter bays that the bigger ships couldn't enter.
Very sneaky, very clever.
Right. So this is something that would absolutely have suited the Uskoks there, whose actual name was Edward Teach, but he was not a teacher.
That's right.
He was a sailor from Bristol, and he's one of the most well-known pirates. And under his reign, the Bahamas were known as the pirate capital of the Caribbean.
It's a pretty great name.
Yeah, but he only showed up when the English got the Bahamas. So not at the time when Yanko and his people got there.
So blame the British. Got it.
Right. So he knew what he was doing. He knew his people. And there is one animal that tells us that the Croatians were in the Bahamas, and that is a type of pig.
All right. Okay.
This is the Croatian pig.
Oh, oh, he's adorable.
Really cute. And I told you that they can dive. So I will
Yeah.
show you some water pigs now. They love to swim. They're now an endangered breed in Europe, but
Oh.
they're really good at swimming. They're really good at diving, and they dive in rivers and they eat mussels in rivers.
Oh. Okay.
So they can actually open their eyes underwater and they can find the mussels and then just grab them with a snout and take them back up, which means they're clever enough to hold their breath underwater.
Wow. That's quite something. Diving pigs. Unbelievable. And it's only this specific Croatian breed, right?
Right, so pigs don't usually do that. And pay attention to their colors because many of them have this sandy color with black spots.
Hmm.
And we will see that again in the next pictures because the Bahamas have a small island that is called the Big Major K. It's tiny. It's not big. It's not major, but it has a beach that is called Pig Beach unofficially, and you can swim there with pigs. And when you compare these pigs to the Croatian pigs, it's exactly the same color,
Oh my god.
and they show the same behavior. So these pigs love to swim, and they can dive. I mean, it's salt water, so I don't know if they're opening their eyes underwater
Hmm.
because that would be a bit different. But it's the same size of pig. It's the same type of pig.
Very interesting. I see. I see. So I'm guessing the belief is that they brought some Croatian pigs over, and
Yes.
over the years they just kind of kept spreading and growing and thriving in the Bahamas. That's amazing.
Right. And in the Bahamas, you don't just have these pigs in one place, you have them on multiple islands. But Pig Beach is the most well known place.
Wow. Pig Beach.
So the sad thing is that the colony did not work out.
Oh well,
Um,
I mean the pigs are okay though. That's all I care about with this story. But I had a funny feeling that a colony with no women would probably not work out. Allegedly.
well, what happened was probably that the Spanish found them and were not happy that they were there. So they either kicked them out. It's possible that they managed to escape with some ships, or they killed them all. And here we're coming in the territory of the British settlers of North America. Because you've probably heard of the Lost Roanoke colony.
I have.
They all vanished by 1590, and they only left this carving in a tree that reads Croatoan.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't that sound like Croatian?
It sounds incredibly similar to Croatian.
So there is a map. You can see it's Croatoan Island is an actual island that is south of the Roanoke Island, so it's not the same. And Croatoan used to be a tribe in the area.
Hmm.
And they also lived on Roanoke Island. So they were the first people who ran into the English. And that was, let me look this up, in 1583, 1584. They made first contact with the English settlers who came over in what is now North Carolina. Croatoans are a tribe. And there is a theory that maybe in 1560 or around that time, the Croatians from the Bahamas made it to these islands. Because, they didn't have much of a choice where they wanted to sail. The only way to go was north. Because in the west and in the south was New Spain.
Mm.
And in the east was Old Spain.
So I guess north it is.
And this is about, well, from the center of the Bahamas to Roanoke Island, it's about 580 miles, which is about 1,370 kilometers. And it's not that far. If you come across the Atlantic, then it's not such a problem to sail that distance. So it's unclear why they didn't land anywhere else in North America, why they didn't go to Florida. Maybe because in Florida they also had some Spanish walking around and looking for the Fountain of Youth, for example. So maybe they just thought it was safer to sail further north. And the theory says that the Croatians didn't really encounter the English, but they encountered the Croatoans. And that maybe this tribe is named after the Croatians because they mixed with them.
That's an interesting theory.
So it's possible that some of the Croatoan people in 1590 were already mixed, that they were mixed European and North American Indian. And perhaps this carving of the word Croatoan meant that the English settlers on Roanoke Island had found out that there are European settlers on Croatoan Island. And they went there to check this out. So maybe they had heard, hey, there are actually other white people here. Or that they were attacked and that the pirates, well, the 60-year-old pirates at that point tried to steal their women or something like that.
Yeah, it could be. Could be, especially if they didn't bring them to begin with. Yeah, then, I mean, desperate times, right?
Right. Because, well, as I said, it's unclear whether they had any women with them from Croatia. So that is a connection. It's a very vague connection. We don't know anything about it, and it's essentially just a theory what could have happened. Don't take this too seriously, but it's interesting because Croatoan and Croatian actually sounds very similar.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting theory, no doubt. But yet again, it is, like you say, just a theory.
So I've given you a lot of information now. And the background story is true. So all the facts that I showed you are true.
Right.
You can look all of this up. You can look up the Uskoks and New Spain and the Bahamas and the people being brought from the Bahamas to Hispaniola and basically worked to death. So all of this is real. But there is one thing about the story that is not real, and that is Yanko Zench. I made him up.
Oh, well, I thought we were learning about an original Pirate of the Caribbean here, but
No.
yeah, I guess not. Yanko Zench, just totally made up dude, based on real people and real situations.
Right. So this could have been a 1-minute short about Croatian pigs probably living in the Bahamas nowadays. But it has such a big amount of backstory that I thought, okay, I need to make a story for this because, just throwing facts at you doesn't work. And I learned this when I was a university tutor, that people keep things in mind for a longer time, and they're more accurate with facts when you bundle it up in a story. So that is one trick that you use. You always tell a story. You don't just throw names and dates at people. And I would have had to explain this anyway because it's so bizarre. So if I had just told you, hey, there are Croatian pigs in the Bahamas, you would have asked, well, how did they get there?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I mean, that's a big reason why things such as like documentaries work really well, because if they're telling a story, you're right, people pay more attention to it, they're more receptive, they engage with it more. You're completely right.
Yes, and well, actually, in the Bahamas, people say we don't know where these pigs come from, but the minute I saw them on screen, I knew that they were Turupolia pigs.
Oh, there we go. We even got the official name. That's nice.
Yes, I'll write that down for you.
Yeah.
So we're doing something that a South African writer did in 1986 in his book Foe. His name is J.M. Coetzee, and everyone gets that wrong. He's South African, but white South African. He grew up in a family that spoke Afrikaans, which is a dialect of Dutch
Hmm.
spoken among the Dutch settlers in South Africa. And they also spoke English, so he's fluent in both. And he wrote this story about Robinson Crusoe. This is another fan fiction.
You and your fan fictions.
Yes, but this is really good fan fiction. So I'm mentioning this book because he has a character in there that is not an original character. Well, in fanfiction, you call them original characters when you make them up. But in this case, it's not a character that is in the story of Robinson Crusoe, in the historical story. Her name is Susan Barton, and she's looking for her daughter who has been kidnapped and allegedly was taken to the West Indies. So Susan Barton is trying to find her daughter, and she runs into Robinson Crusoe. So she doesn't stay in one place. She makes a whole journey. And she stays with Robinson Crusoe and Friday for about a year, and then they're rescued. And Friday can't speak because slave hunters have cut his tongue out, and Robinson dies on the way back to England.
Oh.
So she's the person who is trying to write a book about this, and she realizes that she can't do it. And she goes to one Mr. Foe, and we know him as Daniel Defoe.
Daniel.
And she asks him for help with her book. She tells him the story, how she got to the island and how they lived together, and what Robinson was like. And he starts to write this novel about the situation, and then he cancels Mrs. Barton. So normally in fan fictions you add characters like Mary Sue's, and that would have been a great Mary Sue. You just insert a woman to have some sexual tension and a love interest for Robinson, and maybe even like a love triangle if she's into Friday too. But in this case, the author inserts a female character into the story, and then he takes that female character back out. Because Daniel Defoe thought it would be a better story if it was just one man and his native friend.
Right.
And this is essentially what I've done here with Yanko Zench. You need that character as a plot device. You need that character to keep the story going and to explain why you're talking about Uskoks and Turks and whatnot. But ultimately, you can take him out of the story because it's a story about diving pigs.
Yeah, he's only helpful to get us to the point we need to get to. I see.
Right. So that is the story of Yanko Zench, the pirate that didn't exist. And it's not as long as our usual stories.
That's all right. I mean, I know I was yawning that other time, but it's I tend to do a fair amount of stuff, and it overlaps a little bit sometimes. I've let it get a little bit out of hand, if I'm honest. So it's not you. You're not boring me. Don't feel like that's the case. I just need more energy and coffee in me, really, to to see me through. That's all. But I was a bit more prepared today, luckily.
No, it's fine. It's all right. Yes. Any questions about that?
No, I mean I feel like you weaved a really fascinating tale there that ended up in a certainly not quite where I knew it was going, but I think it has a somewhat happy ending, at least for the pigs anyway, which is now clearly a very big tourist attraction in the Bahamas. I think it's great. I didn't even know that was like a thing, so I'm super excited now to eventually go to Pig Beach and link that
Yeah.
to our story and be like, oh my god, hey, this is Pig Beach, and you'll never guess we talked about this on this episode here. Go watch. It's like, haha, double win.
Oh, yes. um, sorry, I wanted to use an Australian term because it fits so well. So, you know that Australians have a different term for Speedo.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
Yes, they call Speedos budgie smugglers.
That's the one, budgie smugglers. It's great.
So, you in a budgie smuggler. Um,
I don't wear those, man. You gotta let stuff breathe. What's wrong with people?
well, standing in the water, playing with the pigs.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not gonna wear not like a male model. What do you take me for?
Who
Yeah,
knows? I
that's
mean,
that's what they've come to see. Yeah, me in a speedo. Me.
oh, we had this situation with my Latin teacher and his wife, who was also a Latin teacher. And they went on holiday in Italy. So they took pictures of the Roman architecture in Italy,
Right.
and they made two pictures for each temple. And, because one picture had him in it, and the other picture had her in it. And her students only got to see the pictures of her husband in shorts, and we only got to see her pictures in shorts.
Right.
So none of us would see their teacher in shorts, so we didn't lose respect for them.
You know what? That's pretty smart, I gotta say.
Yes, and it was a hell of a lot of work to make these, to take these photos, because back in the times you needed an actual camera. You couldn't take a phone to take these pictures. So
Yeah, and
they
then
really
you had to
put
go
in
get them
some.
developed and everything. Oh, God, it used to. I wouldn't say it took ages, but it was definitely more effort.
Yes. Okay. Then we have.
Yanko Zench, the man who never really existed. Unbelievable that Ligeia would trick us like this. I can't believe it. But you know what? We got a happy ending. We learned about some pretty great pigs that have come all the way from Croatia to the Bahamas and are now clearly world famous. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, thank you so much, Ligeia, for teaching us this crazy story about diving pigs and weaving a really fantastic tale of how they got all the way to the Bahamas.
You're welcome.
Well, everybody, let me know. Let us know. Uh, let us know what you think down below. I gotta say, I'm quite taken aback with all this crazy information about pirates and everything. It makes me think because I've been watching this. I'm watching a show because I love anything, whether it's paranormal, crime, or mystery, whatever and stuff. And so one of the mystery things I like watching is called Curse of Oak Island, which is way up in Nova Scotia. But what's interesting about this island is the fact that supposedly pirates, crusaders, all kinds of like different people from 1500s to like 1800s have been there supposedly burying treasure, and they find an awful lot of coconut fiber on this island, which kind of like really pertains to the theory, kind of really reinforces it that people from the Bahamas, perhaps pirates, went up there to bury some treasure. So I just think it's very interesting how at the end of your story, how these maybe these quote unquote pirates might have gone further north, and maybe in North Carolina, but who's to say that they couldn't have even gone even further north? We don't know. just a little food for thought there. But anyway, thank you so much for watching Too Weird to Be True. This has been another fantastic episode, and we will we'll see you for the next one. Let us know what you want to see next, because we got tons of great topics covered. But write in, tell us your thoughts, tell us cool things. Might even feature you on the show. You never know. You might even get a spot. Who knows? We should bring on some guests. I think that'd be great. But we need some.
Oh yes, I have a
stories.
volunteer.
She's even got one. We just have to figure out a date now. So yeah, if you want to see that sooner, let us know. Anyway, we'll wrap that up there this time. Thank you so much again, Ligeia, for regaling us on this crazy tale with diving pigs. Absolutely
Yeah, it's
wonderful.
always a great time.
It really is. We'll see you guys for the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Patreon members for all the love and support. It's thanks to people like you that we can keep growing.